Hello and welcome. Today we are going on a powerful, challenging journey through American history, one that shows how institutions of race, gender, and power intertwine to shape lives in profound, often devastating ways. We will explore how white women, far from being mere bystanders, played active roles in the machinery of slavery, in the system of racial control that followed emancipation, and in the enduring structures of inequality we continue to grapple with today. When we think of slavery in the United States, many of us picture the enslaved African-American men and women, the brutal plantations, the overseers, the auction blocks. But there is a dimension that is often glossed over: the role of white women, wives, daughters, mistresses, property holders, who benefited from, managed, perpetuated, and sometimes defended the system. We'll unpack how these women were both shaped by and shaped the system, and how their lives intersected with the lives of the enslaved. We'll move chronologically from the Antebellum era through the Civil War and Reconstruction into the Jim Crow era and up to the legacies that linger. I invite you to sit back, and together we'll highlight stories, examine legal dynamics, social customs, and the undertold power dynamics of gender and race. Let's begin. We begin in the antebellum American South, a society where white people, especially white men, held near total political, legal, economic, and social dominance. They constructed a violent and oppressive system designed to terrorize, exploit, and subjugate black communities. Lynchings, physical beatings, savage treatment. These were real tools of control, and even when overt violence was absent, the system of segregation, of separate communities, of segregated housing, of the criminal justice system rigged with discriminatory policies, ensured that racism permeated every facet of American society. Into this world stepped white families who accumulated enormous material benefit and privilege from the racial hierarchy. Wealth built upon stolen labor. Social status maintained through exclusion, and embedded within that world, white women. Now, to be clear, white women in that era did face legal and social limitations. They could not vote. When they married, the doctrine of coverture often made the husband the legal head of household, and the woman's identity, legally speaking, merged into his. They were expected to be the heart of the home, obedient, compliant, modest, and were constrained in mobility and public presence. If a woman wanted to travel, she often needed a male chaperone. Abuse and control of women were embedded norms rather than exceptions. But, and this is crucial, the fact that these women were legally disadvantaged in some ways does not mean they were powerless or uncomplicit when it came to slavery and racial exploitation. Indeed, for many, slavery provided a route to freedom within a particular hierarchy. White women understood that ownership of enslaved people could bring social standing, marriageability, and economic security. Historians like Stephanie E. Jones Rogers have shown that in the 1850s and 1860s, white women made up about 40% of listed slave owners in certain Southern census data. Smithsonian Institution. In other words, owning enslaved people was not just something done by their husbands. It was very often something done by them. Their property, their wealth, their power. To understand how this worked, we need to look at how young white girls were socialized for this system. From an early age, sometimes before they even reached school age, girls were groomed in ways that gave them a sense of stewardship over enslaved people. They were given enslaved servants as gifts, not just to lighten the workload at home, but also as symbols of status and indicators of their future as wives and mistresses. In one particularly chilling example, the historian found the case of a 3-year-old girl demanding her father cut the ears off a black servant and get her a new maid. Lizzie Anna Burwell demanded her father cut the ears of a black servant and get her a new maid from Clarksville. This shows how normalized the violence was, how early the training began, as documented in the research cited by Jones Rogers. Women inherited slaves, were gifted slaves, managed them, and they did not just passively allow others to do the managing. They themselves sometimes aggressively directed punishments, sales, transfers, and breeding. Historian Jones Rogers writes, white women actively participated in the slave market, profited from it, and used it for economic and social empowerment. Not only did they often refuse to cede ownership of their slaves to their husbands, but they also employed management techniques that were as effective and brutal as those used by slave-owning men. So imagine a world. A white girl grows up, and the household teaches her that enslaved people belong to the house to her. Her future husband, he might own land, but she brings enslaved labor as part of her dowry. She learns to manage them. She watches punishment. She is taught how to assert authority. When she marries, she may sign prenuptial agreements, trusts, deeds of gift, wills that guarantee that her enslaved people remain her property, not automatically absorbed into her husband's estate under coverture. In some states, white women use legal maneuvers to ensure their control. In short, for many white women, slavery was their freedom, not freedom from patriarchy in the abstract, but freedom within a racial system. It gave them power, autonomy, wealth, status. Women inherited slaves, were gifted slaves, and later purchased them outright. For many, this was their first real taste of ownership, of economic and social control. A dowry might include land, silver, and people. A girl might be told that her enslaved maid would grow up with her, serving her for life. Enslaved women became extensions of their mistress's identity, used to signal refinement, generosity, and virtue, while also bearing the daily weight of forced servitude. As these young women matured, they were taught not just to manage a household, but to manage a system. They learned to discipline, to command, and to preserve order through fear. They read etiquette manuals that linked femininity with authority, morality with mastery. They learned that kindness could be dangerous if it blurred the lines of hierarchy, and so many maintained a delicate, ruthless balance, enforcing dominance with a smile, punishing disobedience with fury. Marriage only expanded that authority. Under coverture, women technically lost much of their legal identity, but many used trusts, wills, and prenuptial contracts to protect their enslaved property. The law became a tool of control. Through careful paperwork, they preserved ownership of human beings even within marriage, ensuring that their wealth and their power remained intact. In court cases across the South, white women appeared not as passive victims, but as active litigants defending their property rights in enslaved people. And when punishment occurred, they did not always turn away. Diaries and letters describe mistresses who ordered beatings, separated families, or sold those who resisted. Others claimed to be kind owners, but their kindness still existed within an inescapable structure of violence and dehumanization. Their power was conditional, their security dependent on maintaining a racial order that placed them above black people and below their husbands. Then came war. The Civil War brought chaos to the Southern home front. Enslaved people fled to Union lines, and white women were left to defend both property and ideology. Many took on new authority, organizing labor, rationing food, and writing to Confederate soldiers about their sacrifices and endurance. Yet even as the Confederacy collapsed, many refused to see the moral weight of its defeat. When emancipation arrived, they described it as theft, the loss of their people, their wealth, their way of life. In the decades after, those same women became architects of memory. Through women's clubs, church groups, and the United Daughters of the Confederacy, they rewrote history. They built monuments, shaped textbooks, and spread the myth of the faithful slave and the gentle mistress. They turned oppression into nostalgia, brutality into grace. The lost cause ideology was, in many ways, their invention, a way to sanitize their past and secure their place within a changing world. Yet the legacies of their choices did not die with them. The racial hierarchies they defended reshaped themselves into segregation laws, labor exploitation, and cultural myths that lingered for generations. Their daughters and granddaughters inherited more than land or jewelry. They inherited the unspoken lessons of dominance, silence, and denial. And so when we study American history, we must see these women clearly, not as background figures, but as participants and enforcers in a system that shaped the nation's most enduring inequalities. They remind us that privilege can coexist with constraint, and that oppression often relies on the complicity of those who appear powerless. This story is not one of villains and victims alone. It is a story of systems, of choices, of how ordinary people uphold extraordinary injustices. To confront it is uncomfortable, but necessary, because only by understanding how deeply gender and race were entwined in the making of American power can we begin to untangle them today.